what is a community and what should be the goals of a community, especially for a very nascent startup if they are attempting to go the community building route?
Yeah, to me, like the most basic meaning behind it is just shared set of values and interests between a group of people who have a shared set of values and interests. And whatever that is, whatever they're connecting around, it could be a million different things. And I think it can apply to companies in different ways. So I've seen companies, like you mentioned, look at it as like a marketing lever for distribution, or companies look at it as like a support lever for closing more tickets and getting people to help each other figure out the product. It could be many different things.
So I'm seeing more and more success scenarios of B2B companies, which are more targeting the developers, but there are a lot more success stories for B2C companies, right? Or maybe prosumer kind of companies, be it Canva, be it Notion, be it Figma. Most of these are starting with B2C, but they are more prosumer, go to agencies, go to multi-user level. Have you seen that success scenario in a typical B2B world, or is that very difficult to achieve?
I think it can work in both.
Welcome, Thrivers, to our new podcast. Our today's topic is blending community and product together. This is all about the advice to the early stage startups. We have Ben Lang. Ben is joining us from Israel today. As many of you might know, he is a renowned figure in community leadership. He's also now an entrepreneur. So I got to know about that just a couple of months back as well. By the way, I first got to know about Ben as a community leader for Notion. I have been following his Notion templates. I've been looking at some of the community posts that he does, even on LinkedIn. He's publishing a lot more wonderful articles on LinkedIn. Somehow I assume that he's going to continue building more such communities. But maybe he became richer. He started angel investing, and he's also now helping out on the angel track cohort for First Round Capital. He has been a master product hunter. He's been hunting and helping many startups to launch their products. And recently he's been building Next Play. I believe Next Play is about discovering what's next for you, for curated opportunities, hiring, building communities, and so forth. Ben, could you maybe introduce a little bit about yourself if I missed something there?
Yeah, thanks for having me on. And yeah, I'm doing a bunch of things right now. I would say in the past, I've been a founder, I've been an operator at a couple startups, and I've always been into building community, not just professionally, but also personally. I've had a fantastic time bringing people together in a bunch of different ways, ranging from at tech companies to through international food holidays to dating groups and a bunch of other things. So it's always been a personal passion. During COVID, me and a couple friends started a dating group on Facebook that now has 25,000 people in it, and at least 100 couples we know have gotten married from it, but we think it's a lot more actually at this point.
That's your sign of building community. You have been adept at it. So maybe that's today's topic. And by the way, that's a surprise to me. I was not aware that Ben has been building dating communities as well. Congratulations, Ben, on that one. So today's topic, or today's audience on ThriveStack Play, where we post out all of these new podcasts. Most of the audience is early stage startups. There are quite a bit of investors as well. And we got some comments on how to build communities, especially for early stage startups where balancing between building a product and building a community, it takes an effort. So maybe let's dive into it a little bit. So maybe could you start off with your experiences on helping on the good old Notion days, where you're probably one of the first 10, 15 employees who joined the company. Notion was very nascent at that time, and you started building a baseline community. Could you maybe share some experiences on why did you go about building a community? Who did you target, and how did you start on that particular journey? And I'll have subsequently questions on how can others replicate this particular model if there's a way for them to learn from it.
Yeah, I think what's important is when I joined Notion already had a product that people were using. And so the community that we were building around Notion was really around the product and its capabilities. I did, before Notion, I spent some time working with a company that was selling to IT leaders, and I started working there before there was a product. And so that was a totally different story. So I would differentiate between having a product people love and being early pre-product market fit. With Notion, I think a lot of it, the way it started was I was a big fan myself. I found Notion when they had launched on Product Hunt and started using it, and a couple tries, I think on the third or fourth try, I clicked, and I was like, whoa, this is incredible. This is magical software. I started tweeting about it. I started helping people set up their Notion. I helped start a Facebook group about Notion. And so many people were asking to see how I was using Notion, and I was curious how other people were using Notion. So I built a website where people could share just screenshots of what they were doing inside of Notion. This was before there were templates, before you could duplicate pages. And I just did all this on the side for fun because I was loving the product. And that's how I connected with the team and started working with them. And I think early on, it was clear there was like some fanatic love for Notion, me being one of them, but there were other people out there who had similar feelings. And so it seemed like, there was a big opportunity to bring those people together and help foster more people who would want to talk and share their love for Notion. And B, this whole idea of templates and sharing how people were using it was also super interesting because there was clearly a need for it, because you would come into this blank canvas product. And this is why I was working on this website where people could share screenshots of their Notion page. And so those were like the two kind of big things that I started to work on first, what we called our ambassador program, and secondly, our template gallery, where we started to curate and collect templates that the Notion users were building.
Maybe I'm trying to simplify this for myself. So while you were doing some other jobs, you found Notion to be a very attractive tool. You started working with it. You became a fanboy. You started working with the founding team and understanding how this is there. So you started collating all of the Notion templates. But at what point in time you actually went from being an outsider to being recruited for Notion? How did that happen?
Yeah, I think it happened like a couple months in. I actually just was emailing the founder, and I was like, hey, when's the API coming out? Just curious, who are these people building this product that I'm so obsessed with? And at some point I messaged him saying, hey, I'll be in San Francisco next week. Do you want to meet up? And he was like, oh, you should come by for lunch. And he connected me to Akshay, the COO then, and Camille, who had just joined to lead marketing. And we met up, and I had lunch with them, and we just started to work together on some stuff. And then a couple months after that, I ended up joining full time. But it happened in a very organic way. I certainly did not expect that when I was starting to build all these like Notion related projects. It was not my goal. I was just doing it because I loved the product.
Yeah, wonderful. Akshay and Camille, if you're listening to this, shout out to you guys. So maybe then you were in Tel Aviv at that time, right? And the team was in San Francisco. And as a community leader, sometimes you have to be on the ground. So how did you manage that? Were you able to go start building a team, start building some kind of a community or semblance of that community in Israel? Or you started doing that in San Francisco as an in-person, or was it more virtual at that time?
I was actually in New York then when I spent a good amount of time in San Francisco. I'd been living in San Francisco before that too. So I was mostly there. I think I switched to being in Tel Aviv mostly during COVID. So everyone was working from home at that point, and it didn't really matter where you were, and everything was virtual for a good couple of years. But I think what was at least interesting with Notion was like it was always very global. There was never like a focus on just New York or just San Francisco or just some other place. Like all the activities and programs we built on the community side at Notion were incredibly international, talking Asia, Africa, South America, Europe, everywhere you can imagine. And that really also was something you could see in Notion's user base. Like going back to way early on, 80% of Notion's users were outside the US. It was just a very internationally heavy community and user base, which I think made it really fun because we got to think of everything as like global opportunities and really think big.
That's very interesting. So maybe I was assuming that people usually talk about building communities a lot more locally first and then go global. In case of Notion, in case of your experiences with Notion, you started global first and then a lot more local. Or would that be right to assume?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I don't think I never really had the opportunity to do that because you're right. It usually does make a lot more sense to start small, to start out with one specific geo. And a lot of things I'd worked on in the past were very much like that. But here it was very different just because of how like given where people were located and the people using Notion. I think I still think we were able to do really interesting things through that and connect people from across the globe who probably never would have interacted and just come together because of like the software that they love.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe tell us a little more about this. So while you joined them full time, and you mentioned that they already had a product. Did they already have customers, paying customers, or mostly these were free solo users who were trying out Notion? So what was the state of affairs at that time when you joined in as a community leader there?
I think Notion already had a good chunk of people, like a good chunk of users on board. Yeah, the company had been through like a really interesting life cycle where they started, the first iteration didn't work out. They had to restart the company. The two founders went to Kyoto, Japan for a few months, rebuilt Notion, hired a couple of people. And so it took many years for Notion to hit some semblance of product market fit and then obviously really explode during the pandemic. But for me, I just, the more time I spent using Notion and building around Notion, the more bullish I was on it. I just wanted to be involved in some capacity. I was also just, to me, my original thinking was like, if I can have a website that people, when they search for Notion, they'll hit my website and they'll check out my templates. And like that to me was like just a great way to get a piece of action. Funny enough, like people who went on to do that, and I interacted with a lot of these people through the community programs we built. Many of them turned out to be incredibly successful and make tons and tons of money and build massive audiences and really impact their lives just through selling Notion templates, consulting on Notion, and this whole ecosystem that developed around it. So it was just really cool to see that from the ground up.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. I'll tell you what I'm thinking about. My next question, maybe I'll set the stage a little bit. A lot of early stage founders, they find themselves at the crossroads while they're building the product. I think 3 or 4 questions that come to their mind. The first one is, should you build a community? Should you invest in building a new community? Or should you join an existing community and then potentially peddle your product over there? Versus essentially start from ground up building a new community, right? In case of Notion, I think the founders earlier on, they latched on to some existing communities, but when you came in, you started building a formal community around, right? The whole community affairs around it. So that's the first question I want to check on. Build new community around the product or join some existing communities? How should you think, at least in today's day and age where there are so many communities now? Maybe let me start from there and I'll build upon it.
Yeah, I think it depends on what your status as a company is. If you're trying to build a community around your product, I think it has to be very clear that you have some semblance of strong product market fit and something like a product people really love. And if you're not there, it's going to be a lot harder to build a community and something from scratch. And I think tapping into existing groups and communities and audiences out there, I think that is a really good way to get there, because it takes a long time to get to the point. It could take years and years to get to the point where you have something really meaningful that people really care about, and then that starts to form around. And I think with Notion, like a lot of that happened organically. A lot of the things people built around Notion, and it happened very organically. And a lot of the times we were just putting fuel on the fire and putting some structure in place and helping out and supporting. But the fact that was happening organically, like that is like the power of it, right? If you're forcing it tops down and people don't really care that much, then it's like you're, walking on a treadmill and you're not really going anywhere. So I think it's incredibly hard to get to that place. But if you are able to, then I think it's definitely worth investing in. And if you're not, I think there are other ways to get around that. I think maybe focusing less on your product and more on some idea or concept or theme or something happening in the world, and like kind of building around that instead of just your product and what you're building. Like that kind of maybe gives you opportunities to build things from scratch and become this connecting force and voice in the world where people come to gather.
Yeah. So maybe let me build upon that. So you mentioned that there should be a semblance of, maybe the prerequisites to building a community is that you should have a semblance of a product market fit. In one way or the other, you should know that, hey, this is working. Whatever you're building is working. Investing in community at that time makes more sense. Maybe until that time, maybe join some communities, understand your ICP, understand whether your product will hold the water or not. Would that be right to maybe simplify it in that particular way?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. What happens if you, and maybe taking a small step back, what do you mean by community? What's the advice that you can give to early stage startups on what are the goals of a community? And there are really 3 or 4 directions that when you search on Google, why do you need a community? You'll find answers around, hey, community is helping you bring in users into the product. So it's an acquisition tactic. Some call it as a support mechanics, wherein community is actually helping, one champion is helping another novice user to use the product, right? So it becomes a support mechanics. Some people talk about, hey, there are new release updates and all of that. So how do you define what is a community and what should be the goals of a community, especially for a very nascent startup if they are attempting to go the community building route?
Yeah, to me, like the most basic meaning behind it is just shared set of values and interests between a group of people who have a shared set of values and interests. And whatever that is, whatever they're connecting around, it could be a million different things. And I think it can apply to companies in different ways. So I've seen companies, like you mentioned, look at it as like a marketing lever for distribution, or companies look at it as like a support lever for closing more tickets and getting people to help each other figure out the product. It could be many different things. I don't think there needs to be like one specific definition of how to apply it to a company. I think it's so different, and there's no plug and play formula here. And the very fact that it's the very fact that it's that way, that I think means that you can really be creative with how you want to bring that to your company, apply that. And I see it as like a creative endeavor. Like, I think figuring out like what it is you're actually trying to connect people around, and what are these shared interests and values, and why are people coming together, and why do they want to come to you and with each other. It's not an easy thing to do, right? And it takes a lot of creativity to do that successfully.
Yeah, so maybe I want to double down on this particular question. Let me ask a slightly different question to come back to this. Do you see communities more functioning well in the B2C world, or do you also see B2B? B2B products can build communities around it. For example, let me list this with. So we've been having conversations with a couple of dev-focused teams, dev-focused products who are building communities around their product, but it failed. But when they started building communities around GitHub and using that as an open source mechanism, it succeeded. So I'm seeing more and more success scenarios of B2B companies, which are more targeting the developers, but there are a lot more success stories for B2C companies, right? Or maybe prosumer kind of companies, be it Canva, be it Notion, be it Figma. Most of these are starting with B2C, but they are more prosumer, go to agencies, go to multi-user level. Have you seen that success scenario in a typical B2B world, or is that very difficult to achieve?
I think you can work in both. I think the prime example is Salesforce. Like they really nailed what I think, like they really nailed B2B community building, right? Like with Trailblazers, their conferences, and they have this massive ambassador program as well, and they've done incredible things there. They have, I think, 100 plus, maybe more people kind of working on as a community function inside of Salesforce. I think they've definitely cracked it. I think the developer-focused companies have also done really incredible things. I definitely think the ultimate win is the companies that kind of say are B2C and B2B, like Notion and Figma, right? So I think Notion, Figma can like tap into both worlds, and I think that's incredibly powerful, but also pretty rare to find. And of course, like consumer companies, yeah, I think there's you can just look at all the subreddits that exist for all these so many consumer companies out there that have built massive communities, and so I really think it can be applied anywhere, no matter how boring of a business you might be building.
Yeah, I've seen the other cases where communities were being shut down because they were too open, right? For example, in the cloud security world here in Seattle and in the Bay Area, there are many early stage startups who are talking about, hey, I can hack into your network. Let me show you how, right? Or and this is how you can prevent it. Sure enough, they're trying to peddle their way into Here's a risk associated with the network, and my product can actually go fix it. But many times this doesn't land well because you're now hacking into networks, you're showcasing cloud vulnerabilities that are exploitable, but not completely vulnerable, but not being able to go fix them. So it's a dicey affair, especially for B2B cybersecurity startups as well. So let me jump into the next question. As you're building the community, maybe Ben, you mentioned that as long as there are shared value, there are shared commitments, and there's a love of a product that you can share and talk and all of that, that works well. But for a startup company, let's say you're a founder to, let's say, Notion, what is the leeway that they will give to someone like Ben? Hey, Ben, go ahead and build a community, and I will let you run it your own course, but without any specific goals around marketing, without any specific goals of acquisition. Have you seen communities which were just let be, start building a community where the founding team is investing in a community without really expecting a return in a shorter time?
Yeah, I mean, I actually think it's really important to return early on. I think it's very different from like traditional marketing, traditional sales, right? Where you put in X amount of time, X amount of dollars, and you want to see X amount of dollars back, X amount of whatever it might be. And I think a lot of companies struggle with that because this whole idea it sounds a lot more fuzzy and unclear. And I totally understand that. I think it's just if having an understanding that if you are able to do this, it will be like a moat that your competitors hopefully won't have, and incredible source of word of mouth and ticket deflection and customer referrals and all these things, product feedback, right? All these things that are just really difficult to do, but they'll all just come flowing in naturally if you're able to do this well. And you will see a lot of return on the investment, but many different ways, like I mentioned. But I think it takes a long time. It's not a short term. So I don't think you want to start looking at it as like a short-term thing. You want to really look at this as a long-term investment.
Yeah. So to all the early startups who are listening to this particular podcast, there you go. That's Ben's advice to you. Have patience and keep your eyes closed for a very long time. Not to say it like that, but I think maybe Ben, could you outline what could be a good framework, especially in this day and age where resources are scarce? You may not have necessarily especially for Series A and Series B companies who ping us a lot on subjects like these, they may not be able to go raise a lot more money. Their valuations are down, especially since 2021, 22 time frame, their valuations are at least about 30 to 50% down, which means that they have to now figure out a way to invest in these communities without actually having specific return of investment. So what frameworks can you advise them on how to think about building these communities, especially for companies who have had a product market fit, but now they want to scale all those 4 or 5 reasons that you said, right? Acquisition channel, reducing support tickets, product feedback, a whole bunch of other things. What framework do you advise these companies on how to build or how to start a community with what specific goals? Maybe 1 or 2 thoughts might be.
Yeah. I mean, I think when you're starting, it is definitely good to have kind of this long-term vision of what you are trying to achieve. I don't think you probably aren't necessarily going to be able to do everything. Like the community's not going to solve everything for you, but if you're looking at it as like an acquisition lever, right? This is going to be how we fuel word of mouth for our company. And I think in that case, be very clear about that from day one. And maybe you take this long-term framework in mind and you check in 6 months later and try to get a better sense of, okay, now that we've been doing this for 6 months, like how is this having an impact on acquisition? Can we find some ways to track referrals or test out affiliates or whatever it might be? Like find some different ways to tie it in. But I would say, I don't think you want to do that from day one. Because I think if you do that from day one, I think it will make it feel a lot less authentic. It will make it a lot harder and unappealing for people to be involved in. So it will sound counterintuitive, but I think you do want to hold off as long as you can, even knowing that is what you're trying to achieve. The good thing about all this is I think community as like a channel and concept is it's not about putting in a lot of money, right? It's not like sales or demand gen where you need to be putting in a ton of money. You can be very scrappy, put in very little amount of money, have very little resources going towards this and have a really big impact. And so I wouldn't be afraid to put in a small investment to test it out and see how impactful this could be in the long run.
Yeah, that makes sense. And do you have some kind of a white paper or framework on how to build communities or something? We can actually put that as part of the show notes as well, and maybe even explore that and write down a couple of top line advice from you and make it part of the podcast blog that comes out.
I have an assortment of stuff. I've been sending it out mostly in my newsletter, so I can maybe share that. It's not like super organized yet, but I hope to get there.
Yeah, so we'll figure out a way to organize it. I know we are out of time in general, but maybe Ben, any last word of advice, any cautionary tales that you have seen not to do things versus what to do things as an advice from you?
I think we've covered a good amount here. I don't think I have anything else.
Okay, super. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been a pleasure to connect with you. And I've been learning from your post quite a bit, and hopefully our Thrivecasters learn the same amount as well. We'll publish all of that very soon. Thank you again so much.
Thanks for having me on.